that this applies to any form of abuse. It applies to emotional abuse, physical, spiritual, mental, psychological abuse. It applies across the gamut. And it makes me sad to think about so many of you who've already experienced some abuse in your life, not even old enough to vote yet. And yet you guys, many of you have gone through really hard things in your life. And I want you to know it wasn't God's plan. God hates abuse. If this is your story, I'm very sorry that this has been part of your life. But I want you to know that it is absolutely possible to heal and be restored if you've gone through some hard things already. I'm living proof. I was sexually abused at school. I was sexually abused in satanic cults. And I was sexually abused by my grandfather and my father. And today I am totally free from those wounds. It's a story that no longer impacts my life. I'm free from that, and I have been for decades. So I know many of you have a question in your mind right now. Having said this, if God hates abuse so much, then why doesn't he stop it? Why does it still continue? And I assure you that I'm going to answer this question, but it's going to take both lessons for me to get there. That's why it's so important you hear both of these. But I promise we will get there. So turn in your Bibles now to 2 Samuel. We'll be in 2 Samuel 13. So our story tonight falls about approximately 500 years after the time of Moses. The Israelites have left Egypt. They're back in Israel, in the land that God promised them. And they're in the period where they are ruled by the kings. And this is a surprisingly short time in the Israelites' history, only about 100 years. Saul was the first king, and David came after him. And at this point, David has firmly established his authority in the kingdom and has won many battles. As was the custom of the day, David had many wives, and he had a lot of children by those wives. Amnon was the oldest son, and his half-brother Absalom was third in line, and Absalom had a half-sister named Tamar. A few years earlier, when Amnon was a teenager, David had an affair with a married woman. While her husband Uriah was away fighting in David's army, David noticed that Bathsheba was bathing on a rooftop, and he had her summoned to the palace. He began a relationship with her, and soon after that, she discovered she was pregnant. David, wanting to hide his sin, I want you to hang on to that, because I want you to remember that as we go through this story, because it's terrible consequences here. And it started because David wanted to hide his sin. He had Uriah brought home in hopes that he'd go home and sleep with his wife and think the baby was his. But Uriah was a man of honor, and he refused to do that while his comrades were still on the battlefield. And he spent the night with the servants. Still not wanting to admit what he had done, David sent Uriah back to battle and arranged to have him killed on the battlefield. David then took Bathsheba to be his wife. God was not pleased at all with David's behavior, and the child did not live. A few years later, Bathsheba got pregnant again and gave birth to Solomon, and Solomon would be the one to take over the throne and become the third and final king to the United Kingdom. The kingdom split after that, and that's another story. So there's always consequences of sin. I want you to think about that. We never get away with sin. It may take a while for the consequences to catch up with us, but there are always consequences. You'll see just how much David and his family lost as we tell this story tonight. So why am I telling you this pre-story? Because the atrocities that are about to be committed didn't just come out of thin air. There's a known reason why this sin pattern got started in this family. Sexual sin and abuse was modeled to the kids, to Amnon, by their father, by David. Abuse is frequently a generational problem. Just in my family alone, I know that it went back 3 generations, and I'm certain much further than that, I just don't have the information. So let's dive into our story and see what happened. Let's start at the beginning, 2 Samuel 13:1. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. So Amnon is obsessed with his half-sister. Was this true love? Absolutely not. True love treats other people with respect and kindness. It doesn't hurt the other person. Amnon is #1 prince in the kingdom. No one has more power or privilege in the kingdom except his father David. Amnon can have anything he wants. He can have anyone he wants, except his sister. Why would Amnon be looking in a forbidden direction? Now we know. It was behavior modeled to him by his father. That doesn't remove Amnon's responsibility for what he's about to do, but it does help us understand it. Amnon is still responsible for his actions. So at this point in the story, Amnon is still at temptation crossroads. He's tempted to abuse his sister, but he hasn't done it yet. He's at the crossroads. And the temptation's coming from himself. He is the source, although I'm confident Satan is there encouraging him and egging him on in this behavior. So where did the obsession get started? In Amnon's mind. That's a very important thing for you guys to hang on to, for all of us to hang on to. Amnon allowed himself to think inappropriate thoughts about his sister. He allowed sinful thoughts into his mind and just let them camp out there. Like all of us, Amnon was in full control of his mind, of what he chose to think about and what he didn't. He chose to make Tamar his mental focus. He nurtured those thoughts day and night until he made himself sick. We have control, and no one else, over the thoughts in our mind, over what we choose to think. And there's your first blank, control. Sin always starts in our mind. There's your next blank, mind. That's the growing field. If you don't want to do things that are wrong, sinful, evil, bad, dangerous, etc., then don't think about doing such things. And don't hang with people who are doing those things, or even thinking and talking about it. It's dangerous. That's where the problem starts. Our thoughts are the launching pad for our behavior, both good and bad. So let's keep going. We're in verse 3 now. Now Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shimeah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, "Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab said. "When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand. So what just happened here? Amnon was looking for help. Did he go to his parents or the priest or some trusted adults in his life? No, he chose his cousin Jonadab. Why did he do that? Because he knew the kind of person his cousin was, crafty and devious. Amnon didn't want help trying to do the right thing. He wanted help to do the wrong thing. And he gets what he's looking for, a plan to get along with Tamar. If Amnon had sought advice from a wise person, perhaps the multiple tragedies that are about to occur in this story never would have happened. They might have been prevented. It matters who you listen to. It matters. Let's keep going, verse 6. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat it. So David enters the picture at this point in our story while checking on Amnon, who is faking his illness. David hears this request that he wants his sister to come and bake this bread, come to his bedside, and David gives the okay. And the stage is now set for this horrible event to occur. And at this point in the story, I always wonder why David didn't see through Amnon's fishy request. Why didn't he question that? Why didn't he wonder, well, why does he want Tamar to come? I mean, we've got servants all over the place, you know. But David doesn't question the request. It almost seems like he's not concerned for his daughter, but he couldn't see through Amnon's ill intentions. And that tells me that David had received healing for his unhealed wounds. Things, painful things had happened in his life, and he hadn't had his heart and mind restored, and his radar was way off. If David had received healing for earlier events, his radar would have been more accurate. So I think it's time to finally consider the victim of our story, Tamar. She's a beautiful young girl. She's probably about 15 years old. She's pure. She's undefiled. She's innocent. She dreams of a future and is full of hope. Then one day she's summoned to her half-brother's quarters and asked to make bread for him. Tamar is where she's supposed to be, doing what she's supposed to be doing. Let's pick it up again, verse 9b. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom so I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. No, my brother, she said to him, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her. And since he was stronger than she, he raped her. In a matter of minutes, Tamar's hopes and dreams are shattered. She tries to reason with Amnon, to convince him to stop. First she tells him what he's doing is wicked. He'll be shamed in the community and have a bad reputation. Or maybe she could talk to David about marriage. And yeah, I know, like, that's kind of icky, right? Weird, they're siblings and given the circumstances, but that actually was the custom of the day. It was accepted and allowed to marry siblings. And then Tamar tries to get him to think about his supposed love for her. Well, there's no love there. Nothing would stop him. Tamar's really amazing in how she handles this, fighting for her freedom, but nothing works. Nothing will change Amnon's mind. He will not be stopped, and he sexually abuses her anyway. So let's pause here for a moment because I want you to check in with yourself. This is a very emotional story and typically evokes a lot of feelings, and I want you to think about what you are feeling right now as you consider the story. I'd like you to try to identify 3 or 4 feelings that you have about this. And if you're not sure what your feelings are, go to page 115. That's your feelings page. Sometimes if we see the words, we can identify what we're feeling a little more easily. I'll give you a moment to do that. Just write down a few feelings that you're having. I need to say something here about Tamar. Whether she spoke to Amnon or not, whether she came up with an argument or not, whether she fought or didn't fight, whether she was plain looking or beautiful, no matter what Tamar did, she was not responsible for this abuse. Tamar was worth protecting. She was worth being loved and cherished. She was worthy of respect. Tamar was precious and valuable before she was sexually abused, and she was precious and valuable afterward. This act, no matter what was done to her, never changed her inherent worth. The abuse was not Tamar's fault, and that's your next blank, fault. And if you were abused, whether emotionally, physically, spiritually, if you were abused, it wasn't your fault either. This act occurred because of the pride living in Amnon. That's why. He committed a hideously wicked act that resulted in ruining a precious life. Amnon is responsible for raping Tamar. It doesn't matter that the plan came from his cousin. It was Amnon who chose to do this act. Abuse attempts to damage a person at the very essence of their being. And there's your next blank, attempts. Tamar's essence was still good, still pure, still valuable, but her perception of herself changed. Her perspective about her identity changed. She was still precious and good. No doubt Satan was part of this event from beginning to end. And when Amnon raped her, he showed up with the same pack of lies that he showed up with in my life and in every abuse victim's life since the beginning of time. It was my fault. I deserved it. I am worthless. I am and always will be damaged goods. My abuse defines who I am. I am useless to God. It is the same lies Satan pummels every abuse victim with. The same lies. They're always attacking the victim's identity, causing them to question their value. Satan has stolen far too much from us. Let us not give him our identity too. Even though the damage of abuse is deep, it is significant, it is absolutely repairable. There's your next blank, repairable. I'm not saying healing from abuse is easy, but I am saying it's not only possible, it's guaranteed if we will follow God's healing path, the same healing steps that we're teaching you in our class together. And there's your 3 blanks. Easy, possible, guaranteed. Believing lies will make this worse for Tamar, not better. It will be hard work for her to find her way back to the truth. But if she will choose to reject the lies and believe the truth, then it will help her heal. And if you were abused in some way, believing the truth and rejecting the lies will help you heal too. So here's the truth. It was my abuser's fault. I did not deserve it. I am precious and valuable. I was wounded, but God will heal and restore me. God defines who I am. God has a purpose for my life. Those are powerful truths. I encourage you to write them on a card and keep them with you. And whenever those lies start knocking at your mind again, go back to that. Remind yourself. Say it out loud. That's not true. My life is valuable. I'm precious to God. He has a plan for my life. Abuse is a very complicated wound. But if you'll follow these healing steps that we are giving you, we're just getting started. There's a lot of steps that I'll be sharing with you over the next weeks. You will heal. I absolutely promise that. Promise that. And if you haven't had abuse in your life, praise the Lord, that's great news. It is still tremendously helpful to have these tools for when you do encounter hard things in your life. There are a lot of pieces to this wound that Tamar has received. It's far more than just the wicked physical act she went through. This wound is living in many places, and that's going to be our focus here in the class the next 3 weeks. So let's plug this into our current healing tool, the painful event worksheet, and see what it might look like. You don't have to, but if you want to look at the worksheet while I walk through this, you can go back to page 121 and glance at that. So the top of the form, the painful event, obviously Tamar was raped by her half-brother. That's the painful event. So what about Tamar's feelings? She would have had a lot of difficult feelings. Hurt, fearful, enraged, anxious, helpless, worthless, bitter, betrayed, ashamed, disgusted, unworthy, devalued, a very long list. Her actions were this. She chose to remain a desolate woman. I am going to come back to this point next week. We're going to talk a lot about this. I just want to mention it tonight, but we will be back there next week. I'm just guessing at her thoughts. Scripture doesn't give it to us, but they may have included typical things like this. It's my fault because I didn't read Amnon's mind and I went over to the quarters. It's my fault because I'm pretty. I must have done something that made him want to do this to me. I will never get over this. I can never be happy. I'm all alone. Typical thoughts of somebody who's been victimized. Her beliefs were likely, God has abandoned me. I am unlovable. There's no hope for my life. So these are the places where the wound is living. It's living in her beliefs, it's living in her thoughts, It's living in her actions. It's living in her feelings. We have to know that because we want complete healing. All of those things have to heal. It's not just one thing. I want to say something else here. Sexual, you can go back to your outline 127 if you turn the page. Sexual abuse is not just an issue for girls. Boys are sexually abused as well. My husband Brian leads men's healing journey groups, and he's been doing this for about 10 years. And when he started leading these groups, he was so surprised to hear how often men brought this to their small group as one of their healing issues, that they had been sexually abused. So for boys, the damage is just as deep and the wound is just as complicated. It's no different. Sexual abuse attacks our identity, it attacks our beliefs and our feelings. Here's your next blank, identity. As bad as it was for Tamar, being raped by her brother, unbelievably, it's about to get worse. We haven't finished the story. Let's read in verse 15. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said to him, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you've already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of my sight and bolt the door after her." So the servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing an ornate robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornate robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. So what is going on with this? Why is Amnon yelling at Tamar and kicking her out of the room? Wasn't she the victim here? This is so confusing, as if she hasn't been through enough. But now Amnon turns on Tamar. How could he be so infatuated with her to the point that he can think of nothing else one moment and then hating her the next moment? What is going on with this story? Consequences. Consequences are going on. Consequences for Amnon right now. We think we can violate God's ways without consequences, but we cannot. We will always pay a price for our wrong and evil actions unless we turn to God and receive his forgiveness. Amnon never turned to God, and he never took responsibility for what he did. Up to this point in our story, it may look like God wasn't there, that God just sat back and did nothing. But that would be a wrong perspective. As I said, God hates abuse, and he hates all sin. God wants us to choose Trust Trail and go his way because he wants us to have a good life. He wants us to avoid unnecessary pain and suffering by choosing the wrong roads. We know Jonadab and Satan were both tempting Amnon to take Pride Pathway, but God was there